Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joe Davich, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library and DeKalb County Library Foundation, the Lillian Smith Center, Georgia State University, and the Lost Southern Voices Festival, welcome to our special screening and celebration for Lillian Smith. Lillian Smith, of course, would have turned 123 this weekend, and just as clear now as she was when she was alive. Her voice calls to us all in many, many ways. The film, of course, we're going to watch tonight is Lillian Smith, Breaking the Silence. And it was, of course, created by Hal and Henry Jacobs, two local filmmakers who debuted this particular documentary about 2 years ago at the Decatur Library. It was so popular that we actually had to have multiple screenings that went throughout the weekend to accommodate everyone who wanted to see this particular film and learn more about the life and work of Lillian Smith. So tonight we do have a little bit of a special program for you. Rather than talking about the film and technicalities about producing and making the film, we have several people involved with carrying on Lillian Smith's work and legacy. We have Matthew Tuch, who of course is the director of the Lillian Smith Center at Piedmont College, Sue Ellen Lovejoy, who is of course a relative of Lillian Smith, Margaret Rose Gladney, who is an author and editor of the Lillian Smith Reader that was produced by UGA Press several years ago, Carrie Lee Merritt, who is an author and historian whose latest book is Masterless Men, Poor Whites, and Slavery in the Antebellum South, and Anna Weinstein, who is also a filmmaker working on projects involving Lillian Smith. I would also like to remind you that if you would like to purchase a copy of the Lillian Smith Reader or any of Lillian Smith's books, our partner in book selling this evening is Charis Books and More. They are located now in downtown Decatur across from the Agnes Scott College campus. And like so many bookstores since the pandemic really ramped up, have been doing wonderful work, making sure you get books by mail. They've been doing store pop-ups outside and really making sure that we continue to get those reading supplies that book lovers like us so desperately need in these times. But because it is also a celebration this evening, we did have something special planned, and that was, of course, toasting Lillian Smith with the Lillian cocktail that's been named after her. This, of course, is a special cocktail that was created by Farm to Cocktail, a Black-owned business out of Clayton, Georgia. They sell these wonderful mixes called shrubs that are syrups that are locally sourced and locally created. And the Lillian cocktail is featured in their mixology pamphlet. Also to let you know that you will not only be supporting a Black-owned and local business, should you peruse their website for their wares, they also are offering free shipping until December 31st. So if in some way, shape, or form you are looking for that last minute gift and you like locally produced and locally sourced items for that, this would be a wonderful opportunity, especially for those folks who enjoy a good classic cocktail as well. So before we kick off tonight, I just want to go ahead and preface this by saying this is the first time that we've actually shared this film live. We did test it this afternoon and it worked quite well. And I assured everyone that I had not touched anything technological surrounding the area of my computer where we will broadcast this from. But a few tips, just so you know: close the browsers on your computer other than Zoom. And that may, of course, get you greater bandwidth to allow the movie to move seamlessly. Also make sure that you are muted and your camera is off during the presentation. Once the film is over, I'll come back on, I'll reintroduce our guests in order this evening, and feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A portion of the program. Of course, different devices have this located in other places. If you are on an iPad, the Q&A button may be at the top of the screen. If you are on a desktop, it may be along the bottom. But feel free to type those in there and we will make sure that we get those questions answered. Right now, I would like, of course, to turn this over to Carrie Miller from Georgia State University and the Lost Southern Voices Festival. Carrie?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight to celebrate Lillian Smith's birthday. I'm really happy to represent the team of the Lost Southern Voices Festival. So this is actually would have been our 4th event in spring of 2020, but of course, out of safety concerns, we had to postpone those festivities. So this is our first virtual event, and it may not be our last because we will probably continue again in spring of 2021, also with a virtual lecture series. So because it's our first, we're especially grateful to Georgia Center for the Book to help us with the technical expertise. I hope I didn't jinx anyone there. So far, everything's been great. And we're also really thrilled that our panelists have all joined us tonight. So aside from the fact that we're virtual tonight, otherwise everything about this presentation very closely aligns with the mission of the Lost Southern Voices Festival. And that is to invite scholars, writers, authors, historians to talk about Southerners whose voices have been lost, whose work really deserves more attention or consideration. And Lillian Smith, of course, is a perfect example of that. So tonight is a great way for us to kick off our new virtual kind of festivities. That's really all for now. I'm looking forward to the documentary and the panelists. Please check our website, which I'm going to put in the chat window here in just a second, for plans for our spring event. And then finally, I just want to quickly recognize Georgia Humanities and thank them for their financial support and just their overall support to help us kind of make this stuff happen. And finally, happy birthday to Lillian Smith.
Hal and Henry Jacobs did an amazing and beautiful job on that film with all their research. I can't tell you how many times I've watched this film myself. This is about the 10th time we've shown it, but I've watched it multiple times over that. I do have to say tonight was the first time that I noticed my name was in the credits, sandwiched between Constance Curry and Glenn Eskew. So for me, that's kind of like making it onto the podium at the Olympic Games. That's pretty good for my estimation. So we want to kick off the program tonight by talking to Sue Ellen Lovejoy. She's going to share a few of her reminiscences about Lillian Smith, and then we'll move on to our other panelists. So Sue Ellen, if you would like to turn your sound and video on, we can go ahead and get this started.
Thanks, Joe. I've selected 2 major events to share with you. The first is has to do with Lillian's father, Casper, who had a major influence on Lil. And the second illustrates the power of Lil's influence on others. And that leads us to a final statement about Lil's relevance today. The first event that I want to talk about happens in 1915, and I want you to know something about Calvin. Calvin is Lil's father, and he's an extraordinary man. He's been a very prominent and successful businessman in Jasper, Florida. He's employed hundreds of men in his lumber and turpentine mills. He's a very prominent man in the community. They live in a large, lovely home. They enjoy an enviable social position in their society. Someone in the family is always traveling to another country to come back and share with them the awareness and appreciation of other cultures. So this is a rich and a wonderful life that they lead. However, in 1915, World War I faces it offers a new dilemma for Calvin. He is facing financial distress, and he's basically losing everything that he's worked for and accomplished through his life. He's moving his family now from Florida to a very remote part of Georgia, Screamer Mountain in Clayton, where they have a summer home. And let's be clear, this is not just relocating and picking up where he left off. This is recreating a life, both for himself and for his family. And the family at this point is Calvin, his wife Anna, and their 4 youngest children, one of whom is Lil. This is a huge culture change, financially and emotionally as well, a major rupture. So how does Calvin manage this? Well, from his children's perspective, and that's the only perspective we have, he treats the move as this amazing adventure. This is going to be so much fun. Do you know that the dirt in Georgia is red? Can you imagine watching gorgeous sunsets from Screamer Mountain? And I can't wait for you to see how the dogwood bloom in the spring there. So he is just creating this wonderful excitement about going to a new place, that it will be even more wonderful than where they've lived before. For income, he starts a girls' camp. Now, what does Calvin know about managing a girls' camp? He's had lumber and turpentine mills, but he figures it out. So in this transition, Lil learns courage, she learns determination, she learns high spirits because Calvin is always high-spirited, and she learns resilience in the face of adversity. And all of these qualities serve her very well in her chosen profession. So let's jump to the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Lil now has a national reputation as a strong voice for racial equality, social justice in all its faces, and she has had to use all of that courage and determination and facing up to adversity because she has taken the position that you just learned about in the documentary. James Baldwin called Lillian great, heroic, and very lonely. And that is what happened to her in Georgia. She had to have a lot of Calvin's good and high spirits because what she learned was that her convictions were so strong and were so threatening to so many people in the South that she did become very isolated and very lonely. She was managing the girls' camp at this point, which she was forced to close because the parents didn't want their daughters hearing about these issues. And what also happened was that her positions on both segregation and her criticism of Christianity and the church was really very threatening to many people in the Deep South because religion was the heart and soul of their lives. And this was one of the ways in which our family, some of our family members, became very distanced from Lil. This brings us to the second event. I had the extraordinary good fortune to be invited to spend a weekend with Lillian Smith. The invitation was from Lil's older sister, Annie Laurie, who I knew as Petey. Petey lived in Memphis, which was where my family lived. My parents knew her. She was absolutely non-threatening. She was an elementary school teacher. She was very nurturing and maternal. She had a daughter. And so we went to Clayton, Georgia. Now, I have no idea why she chose me, but I have a suspicion that I was the only one who had a driver's license at that point, the only person my age. And so she wanted me to drive her to Clayton. I was 17. All I knew about Lil was that she was my grandfather's sister and that she wrote books about the wrong subjects. That's all I knew. By the time we got to Clayton, Petey and I had made a pact. I had agreed never to tell my parents that she had a glass of wine on the way to Clayton. We stayed overnight in Nashville, and Petey agreed never to tell my parents about the speeding ticket that I got crossing the Tennessee-Georgia line. So we were having fun, and we were in great spirits. However, my comfort completely dissolved when I met Lil. Lil strode across that room, preaching preaching about the evils of segregation and white supremacy, the importance of registering Blacks to vote, the need to question our world, to look at those old ways of doing things, to correct them if they're wrong. I had just walked in the door and she was on me. She was on me. There was no sitting ladylike and folding your hands on Screamer Mountain. She was magnificent and I was frightened to death. I don't remember a lot of details, but what stays with me was the strength of her presence, her eloquence, her amazing intelligence. She was quoting Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Her certainty, too, that her positions were the right positions and that there was no conversation about that, no argument at all. I also remember her taking me aside and saying, you know, Sue Ellen, you don't have to accept the world that you're raised in. You can help change it. I never saw or had contact with Lil after that weekend. She died in 1966, but that weekend was life-changing for me. She had gotten into my head, never to leave. And to bring these two events together, Calvin influencing Lil, Lil influencing me, and Calvin's message to Lil had been, changing things is risky, but not changing them, that's worse, if you can change them for the better. And that message continues to everyone, it's passed on to every single person who reads Lillian's books. We all learn from it. Now, is Lil relevant today? Oh my goodness, yes, more than ever and ever. Just a few reasons why I say that. Hal Jacobs and I had presented Breaking the Silence in Portland, Oregon in 2019. Following our panel of social activists, audience members signed up on the spot to volunteer on issues of racial justice and gender equality. We also got a standing ovation. Then I took the film to Lewiston, Idaho, at the request of a college there. Afterward, the audience members asked the college president to assure them that all of Lil's books would be available to them in the college library. She promised. Just last week, one of my good friends on the East Coast texted me that her book group was reading Caste, and that there was much discussion among them about a quotation by Lillian Smith on the power of being white. So yes, Lillian is very relevant. And my major concern at this point, most important to me, is that our family know and appreciate Lil, that there be no distancing anymore. And that's happening in my generation, I'm very happy to say. My sister and cousins came to Piedmont College for the first Lillian Smith Day. Several of us sit on the board of the Lillian Smith Center with Matthew. Some of us are very active, progressive activists on all progressive causes. Our next cousin gathering will be in Clayton with a pilgrimage to Screamer Mountain. My sister's granddaughter is named Lillian. So this family is not going to be distanced anymore. Is Lillian Smith relevant? Oh yes. This country is hungry for her voice. Thank you, Joe.
Oh, thank you so much, Sue Ellen. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Sure.
So now I'd like to turn our attention. We want to really continue that theme by talking about Lillian Smith's work and the legacy of her work and how people view her work and use her work today. So I'm going to turn it over to Rose Gladney. She, of course, is one of the editors of the Lillian Smith Reader that was, of course, selected as a book all Georgians should read. It's from UGA Press. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. UGA Press has been doing some fantastic work in the past about 5 to 10 years with some of this stuff. And yeah, I think we can all be proud of that as Georgians. So Rose, if you would like to tell us about Lillian Smith and Lillian Smith's writing. And Rose, I think you're still muted. There we go. You look live now, Rose. Yeah, we're going to try and figure this audio problem out. But why don't we go ahead, as long as we're talking about writing and Lillian Smith's legacy, let's go over to Carrie Lee Merritt. She is, of course, an author and historian. Like I said in the introduction, her latest book is Masterless Men. But maybe you could tell us about how you've been influenced by Lillian Smith and maybe how Lillian Smith influenced your writing.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's really cool that we're doing it online so that there are more people here than would just be joining us in Atlanta. So I have long loved Southern writing. I read as much as I could get my hands on all the way through high school, college, into graduate school. I consumed everything I could that was Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, et cetera, et cetera. But I literally never heard of Lillian Smith until I was in graduate school. And it's just a complete travesty within itself. But I've really thought a lot lately about why that is. And the reality is that Lillian Smith and her work have been written out of history for a reason, for a political reason. Her life doesn't fit the narrative of the South that the rest of the country wants to perceive us as. It doesn't fit the narrative of the white oppressor. It doesn't fit the narrative of the solid white South. And in some ways, her life and her work even shatters the narrative of class-driven racism, because instead of talking about how class and economics really affected racism in the South, she really chose to focus on psychology and the psychology of all white Southerners, regardless of class. And so literally by the mid-1930s, she and her lifelong partner, Paula Snelling, were self-publishing a rather radical and incendiary literary magazine. They featured liberal whites and radical Black thinkers like Pauli Murray, as we saw in the film. Now, Lillian Smith joined nearly every single Southern organization that was seeking to solve the Southern race question. And she basically just drove them crazy. She drove the white leaders of these organizations crazy. She pushed them left on racial questions over and over again. She joined together with the most radical Black members of these organizations and worked to push the white leaders left, especially concerning issues surrounding segregation. So, the one thing that I think has made a lot of this discourse relevant again, in terms of history and journalism, has been the 1619 project. And I think it's a much needed project, incredible, very well researched, based on a lot of good history that's been published in the last 20 or 30 years. But the one criticism I think that some historians have of the project that I think deserves more scrutiny is the fact that there was always interracial organizing in the South. There was always a coalition between Blacks and whites in the South. Even if it was very, very small, there was coalitions, from the time of slavery all the way to the present. There have been interracial coalitions, and we don't want to write those coalitions out of history, because if we do that, we don't give people hope for that kind of thing to happen again. Now, in the film, Brenda Bynum calls Lillian a braver artist, quote, a braver artist, because she actually imagined and wrote about the inner lives of Blacks. And I think this gets at the heart of why her work was so different and new for whites. So she put psychology at the center of both Black and white lives. And she put psychology at the center of everything, from sexuality to motherhood, to relationships, to racism, to classism. And doing so, of course, very, very much bothered the powerful white men that she seemed to be analyzing. As Ralph McGill, of course, the famous Georgian, described her in February of 1955, quote, "In many respects, Miss Lillian Smith is a modern, feminine counterpart of the ancient Hebrew prophets Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah, who came, hot-eyed and accusing out of the deserts, to stand in the marketplaces of their cities crying, 'Woe unto ye who are unrepentant and of little faith,' thereby causing many citizens to be sore annoyed and afraid." She was always an incredible firebrand. You see the kind of fear she stoked in the most powerful white men, not only in the South, but in the nation. Personally, I've had the pleasure to spend some time at her home on Screamer Mountain, and it's just absolutely remarkable to see her library. It's just wall to wall, ceiling to floor, filled with books from every possible genre. It's very, very, very heavy on psychology. There's a ton of Freud, but also philosophy, science, history, fiction, et cetera, et cetera. She was so well read, as well as Paula. But even more impressive, perhaps, is the idea that she and Paula would openly hold these integrated dinners and host Black guests in this incredibly rural area. I don't know how many of you have been up to Clayton, Georgia, but it's right up there in the northeastern corner of the state, right in the foothills of Appalachia. I mean, incredibly rural. And so I think that we today cannot fully comprehend just how seriously these women were putting their lives at risk on a daily basis, just being this, this openly anti-racist. So briefly, I also just wanted to publicly acknowledge the fact that she and Paula, who was contemporaneously referred to as, quote, her good friend or her constant companion, essentially lived openly as a lesbian couple, again, as far back as the 1930s. And this in itself gives us pause in reconsidering how we see the LGBTQ plus community within Southern history itself. On one hand, they're putting their lives at risk and really could have been arrested or hurt or murdered even. But on the other hand, it suggests that at least in some places in the rural South, there were more of a live and let live attitude than something that was punitively homophobic. An argument that the historian Karen Cox has made several times. So an entire book could be devoted just to her experience as a lesbian, and just in terms of sexuality alone. But getting back to race, and I wanted to close with this idea that in addition to being a pioneering anti-racist, Lillian Smith was a wonderful writer, mastering multiple genres. And this is so hard as a writer to cross genres, articles, short stories, novels, novellas, op-eds, on and on. And so she was truly a Renaissance woman, and she continued learning and working on her craft. As fellow writer Buckland Moon said of her in the New York Times in 1949 regarding her magnum opus, Killers of the Dream, quote, "It is almost as though Lillian Smith were saying, 'In my first book, I shocked you into seeing what your sins are. In this one, I'm going to try to convert you.'" So she showed that the sins of the South were awful. She showed the sins of the South, but she held on to hope and she showed a path forward. She scolded and preached, but she welcomed back sinners with open arms and a forgiving heart. So happy birthday, Lillian Smith. And if death comes to the writer when people stop reading their books, then we're all witness to an amazing revival. Long live Lillian Smith.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was absolutely wonderful, wonderful. So I want to check real quick. Do we have Rose back? Rose seemed to get the audio problem cleared up, so we can talk to her a little bit. Rose, are you there? It seems that you've unmuted, Rose, but we can't hear you, unfortunately. Allie, if you could maybe try and help her out, maybe have her log out and log back in, and we'll pick up with Anna and Matthew in the interim. So, so actually, speaking of writing and visiting up at Screamer Mountain, why don't we talk to Matthew Tuch, who's the director of the Lillian E. Smith Center at Piedmont College, about what they're doing up there to preserve Lillian Smith's legacy and her writing. Matthew?
Thank you, Joe. I think I just put it on. Yep, there I am. All right. I had it on a little bit weird up there. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for Carrie Lee, Sue Ellen, Rose, and Anna for being here too. 4 women who, of course, are definitely carrying on the legacy of Lillian Smith in important and varying ways. I just wanted to take a moment to kind of share with you, like we said, the things that we're doing up here and just ways you can stay connected with this, and then just kind of some thoughts. Because like Joe, I've seen the documentary a few times, and every time it kind of has something new to it. And here's our website, piedmont.edu/Lillian-Smith-Center. We're on Twitter and Facebook as well, but if you come to the website, you can see everything you need to see. It is an artist residency, and we do have Residency Awards available. We have 4 now, the Writer in Service Award, which is a $500 honorarium and $500 travel allowance and a 2-week stay at the center. The Gabrielle Stoff Award, which is for educators in social justice, is a 2-week stay at the center. The McClure Scanlon Visual Artist Award, Tommy Scanlon's on the board, and this is for visual artists and a 2-week stay at the center. And then the new award that we have, Emily Pierce was one of the first LES scholars, which is a program we have here at Piedmont where scholars have a social justice minor and study of Lillian Smith in the LES studies class and work with her. And the Emily Pierce Graduate Residency Award comes with the $500 honorarium, and a 2-week stay at the center. And we are open for residencies. There are 2 cabins at the center, and there's one down the mountain. Anna has been there before, like Carrie's been there, like she said. Anna always stays down the mountain. She can tell you about that if you want to know more, but they're open for weekend, 1 week, 2-week stays, $25 a day. And you're pretty much away from everybody up there. So it's pretty good. Have it cleaned every time somebody comes in and out, especially during this time. Along with that, you can also come over here and you can see a lot of things with resources and things like that. I do want to point out, we did have Untangling Whiteness, a symposium in 2020 in October, a virtual symposium. And Dr. George Yancey, who was actually in the documentary, spoke with Dr. Sandra Bangstad. They were on the panel together, but you can go watch the videos here if you actually click on that. And Carrie Lee Merritt Dr. Merritt will be at the symposium that we're going to have, probably going to be virtually the way things are going, of course, in March. And we'll have more information about that at the start of the new year. It's the biannual symposium. A couple of things I want to show you too. I don't remember if Joe put this up. I was dealing with the dog earlier, so I couldn't necessarily hear everything he was saying. I apologize, but I know that somebody toasted a Lillian earlier. I don't remember who it was, but that is actually Carlton Chamblin, who was in Tiger, Georgia, which is actually a little town outside of Clayton where Lil actually taught for, I think, a year, maybe at least a semester in the one-room schoolhouse there. But he does shrubs, and he's from Birmingham originally and moved to Clayton. Didn't know anything about Lillian, found out about her, and then made a cocktail with her namesake, and it uses the peach lavender shrub. And the recipe is right here, just farmtococktail.com. I feel like I'm hawking goods here, but But all these things that are kind of connected to show you kind of the impact. And one of the things that we did, we actually have two students, one student who's an LES scholar, but another student who's in Mass Comm, and they're married and they started a coffee shop here, or actually a roaster here. And for her project, she had to actually work with somebody on campus, or an internship basically. And she worked with us, and we actually made a Laurel Leaf coffee. This year actually marks the 100th anniversary of Laurel Falls Camp. And the Laurel Leaf was actually the newsletter that that Lillian, and actually her dad before her, sent out to the campers and the campers' parents. So it was the newsletter where they talked about everything. And they have it's Blue Ridge Coffee, so blueridge.coffee. And the Laurel Leaf coffee is made in honor of Lillian. And the packaging is what I love that we worked on. This packaging, these designs are actually part of the Laurel Leaf. So these were the designs that were on the top. I forgot who the artist was who did it. I have the name somewhere, but I think she was actually in Clayton. So these are part of that. And on the back, there's actually information about the center and a picture from Austin Briggs, who was an illustrator, whose son became a Joycean scholar. That's a whole nother discussion though too. But along with all that, one more thing that I want to tell you before I get to kind of just two things following up on what Carrie Lee said. Anna Weinstein is going to come in and talk. And we're actually working with Anna right now on a project dealing with Lillian Smith in the camp. And she'll tell you more about that later. And if you want to learn more about that, let us know and we can tell you about it, because we're looking to raise money for it, of course, for that project and other projects as well. We're actually working to do professional development projects for local educators, probably gonna have to be virtual this year. That's one of the main things I want to do. What we want to do is actually buy them books so they don't have to pay for books. For educators, offer them an honorarium, anything, something big, small, whatever, just something for their time. Because like Carrie Lee said, and like others have said, most people, even in Clayton, don't necessarily know her, or they know her name, but don't know about her, or at least what she was about or much about her. And we want to actually be able to talk to teachers and get her into the classroom, especially in Georgia, especially in this area. The other project that we want to work on, actually, this would actually have to be in person, but we want to do kind of a camp. We have 2 bunkhouses at the camp that Craig Amison, who was the director before me, actually did. He's actually in the audience. So, hey, Craig, I saw you in the participant list. And he did a phenomenal job before I got here, getting everything off the ground with the center. But we want to do a camp for underrepresented students, specifically in this area too, and kind of bring them up there to the camp, to the bunkhouses for about a week with different programs. And we want it to be free. So we'd have to pay for food, of course, books, materials, speakers, all that type of stuff. So that's a project probably for next year. But those are things we're actually raising money for in donations. And you can go to our website. We have actually a donation line there. But there are 2 more things I want to share, and then my time's probably running out. And if it is, Joe, please just tell me. You can actually go giving to the LES Center on our website. You can go to the donation page. But one thing with Lillian Smith, there's a lot, but there are 2 things I always go back to. There are 2 images. This is an image from Reginald Marsh, and this is called "This Is Her First Lynching." And this is 1935 in the NAACP. It was actually in the NAACP's an art commentary on lynching, along with other pictures too. And most of the other pictures and sculptures actually show the victim being lynched. So it is actually an African-American, typically a male, who is being murdered. But this image always stands out to me because you don't see the victim. What you see is actually the white townspeople. And the other main thing that sticks out to me with this image is the little girl that they're holding up. There are 2 different versions of this if you look for it. But the townspeople's faces are grotesque. And Lillian Smith talks about in Killers of the Dream and elsewhere the ways that racism, white supremacy infects the oppressor, infects the white citizens, the white people who are doing it, not just the people who they are oppressing. And you can see that in their faces. But the little girl, of course, is still kind of innocent, like she's questioning what's going on. I always think of this picture when I think of Lillian Smith, and I always think of this one. I don't know how many of you have seen this picture before. I share it a lot. If you've heard me talk, I know, but I saw this picture originally in Montgomery. I think at the at the Southern Poverty Law Center Civil Rights Museum, if I remember correctly. It wasn't until I moved to Georgia and actually moved to Demarest, where Piedmont College is. I'm at the college, and the center's a little bit further north in Clayton, that I found out this picture was actually taken 30 minutes from us in Gainesville in 1992. It was a KKK rally with, I don't know the whole story, but the photographer took the picture and the mother snatched the boy out of the way and took him. So you don't know who he is or, anything about him. But I was always struck by this picture. And when I initially saw it, I kind of saw hope in the picture, because you see the African-American trooper looking down at the boy. But the more I thought about it, the more it fits with what Lillian Smith said, of course, and what others have talked about. If you look at the kid, and this is where all that psychology comes in that Dr. Merritt was talking about, you see him looking at himself and tracing his own image. And Lillian and Paula, of course, had her major in psychology, minor in English. She got it from Columbia. Talk about the narcissism of white supremacy and the narcissism of whiteness. And this just reminds me of that. And George Yancey talks about it too. There's one thing I want to leave you with that he talks about from Killers of the Dream. He talks about a scene, or not a scene, it's actually one of the interracial dinner parties, but he talks about the women eating, and especially a white woman who gets physically nauseous when she has to eat with a black woman. And once they eat, she's okay. And Lillian basically says that she got nauseous because even though in her heart she knew what she was doing was right, it was just overcoming those cultural ingrained taboos and those that she calls them, and those rules, as Ernest Gaines calls them. And that reminds me of Lillian too. I think that's one reason Lillian Smith's so important, especially Killers of the Dream, because she talks about herself and she puts herself within this discussion as well. She puts herself squarely in untangling these issues that she has grown into and that she is trying to disentangle, not just from others, but from herself as well. And if you look at Killers of the Dream, that personal pronoun usage, I think is really important, and that intimacy that she has. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And yes, it was me that had the Lillian. We, of course, went through some rigorous testing this week before I wanted to put that out there for everyone, just to make sure it was safe and compatible. Have to do those kind of things.
Yeah, Carlton told me he dropped it off to you.
He did. I was very, very surprised that he did. He was very nice in bringing it to the house and doing a contactless pickup. But it's great, and local guy. It's wonderful. So just like the coffee, I think now is the time where everybody's supporting locally more than they have before, and making an effort and trying to support local businesses right now. So. And, I also saw Craig was in the room. Also in the room is Brenda Bynum, wonderful actress who's performed Jordan Is So Chilly, an encounter with Lillian Smith several times for us at the library. And she just becomes Lily on stage. She also, one quick story while we're seeing if Rose is on yet. When Brenda was performing Jordan Is So Chilly once at the library, I was sort of like setting the stage up, and someone had donated some boxes of books to the library, and sometimes they don't come in the best of conditions or anything like that. And shockingly, as I was going toward the employee room down this, long, windowless hallway, there were these boxes of books, and sitting on top of one of the boxes was actually a first edition copy of Strange Fruit. So I kind of thought that Lillian was speaking to us at that event that evening. So, but it is in Brenda's possession, and apparently she uses it every time she does Jordan Is So Chilly. So I think that's very, very fitting. So let's see if Rose is on so she can talk about the Lillian Smith reader. Rose, can you hear us?
Joe, I'm not sure she's figured it out yet. You might want to keep going.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's actually going to happen. So, well, Matthew was talking about Anna Weinstein and visiting the Lillian Smith Center. So Anna, why don't you talk about what you're doing up there and how Lillian Smith has influenced you?
Hi, thank you for having me. And yeah, so as Matt was saying, I think I've been going up now to the center for about a year and a half. I think, I don't know, maybe 10 times. And I always go back to the same cabin. I always go to Wiggy. And it has been just an incredibly magnificent opportunity for me to step away from my family and my teenagers and do my work in a space where I can focus. And so it's just been incredible. And it's a real gift to as every writer and artist knows who's been there, it's just a real gift. But I started talking to Matthew about this project, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months ago, when we started talking about the possibility of writing, because I'm a screenwriter. And I teach screenwriting at Kennesaw State University, and I write features and TV series as well. And so we started talking about the possibility of doing this. And the more I've been learning about her over the past 6 months, the more exciting the project has been. So I can just sort of tell you a little bit quickly about what, what any screenwriter would look for in a character, and what I'm particularly drawn to in Lillian as a protagonist. But there's something that we talk about in screenwriting, which is that your protagonist has to be active as opposed to passive, right? So a passive protagonist doesn't really have a goal or a desire, and sort of meandering around through the course of the film. So typically, if you're going to turn off a movie after 20 minutes because nothing's happening, right? The protagonist hasn't figured out what it is that she's trying to achieve, and we don't know why that's a difficult goal, and we don't know what the stakes are. So I look at Lillian, and she's so active. I mean, this discussion that we're having tonight too about her being both an artist and an activist. I mean, obviously she's a very forward moving person, which is just what we're looking for when we're trying to shape a story around a character. For me personally, though, my scripts always have female protagonists, and I have I'm working on a book right now for Routledge called Writing Women, Creating Complex Characters, Female Characters for Film and Television. So I have a real interest in trying to shape a screen story around a female character who is complicated. And Lillian is complicated. There are so many fascinating and interesting things about her life. I don't know that we've talked about it very much tonight, and I'm sure that Rose, if she's going to talk, will talk more about it as well. But so with Lillian's sisters, so Esther and Anna Laurie, also known as Petey, and Anna Laurie and Esther would come every summer to work with her at the camp. So you have these 3 sisters, and Esther was a professor in Maryland, a theater professor in Maryland, and Petey, Anna Laurie, worked in Memphis. And Sue Ellen was talking about Petey is the one who brought Sue Ellen up when she was 17 to meet Lillian. And Petey was a very, very important and successful school teacher who ended up, somebody could jump in and correct me, but she took on a very important role with Head Start in the latter part of her career. So you have these really dynamic sisters, these 3 women who were very ahead of their times, all single women. Petey's husband passed away when she was younger, and then she never married again. So I just love this 3 women who had these magnificent careers, and their sort of lives were spinning around each other. We have, when you think about it from a screenwriting perspective, you're exploring their characters' public life, how they presented themselves to the world, their private life, how they engaged with their family, their close friends, and then their secret life that nobody knows about. So obviously, we don't know anything about her secret life. We know some about her private life because of the letters, and we know a lot about her public life. And so when you take a character like this, there's a lot of room for imagining what this world looked like. And it's also very interesting. I just want to say, and I won't keep talking too long here, but I do just want to say, one of the things that's really fascinating to me when you think about a complicated character is she was known as a race writer, and in the latter part of her life was talking, a lot. She didn't want to just be talking about race, and everybody wanted to talk to her about race. And it's always really interesting when you think about the complexity of any one of our situations as individual humans. What are the issues that are really personal and important to us? And especially for those of us who are writers, what do we choose to write about and why? And what are we not choosing to write about and why? And so she's just a really interesting character. And I think this whole concept of her, spending 40 years with Paula and what that relationship looked like. And there's some insight into the relationship through the letters and how the relationship grew and changed over the course of that 40 years. This that I'm working on is a limited series of 6 episodes. So we'll sort of see the before fame, during fame, and after fame, sort of chunking them into 2 episodes at a time. So there's just a lot to mine with a woman like Lillian Smith. So I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to work on it and extend and the possibility of bringing her name to a larger life. I mean, everything that Dr. Merritt was saying about women being written out of history. It's not just Lillian. We see this in so many different areas. And so whenever I can be a part of helping to make sure that she's not written out of history in the future, I'll be thrilled. So happy birthday, Lillian. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anna. It's very exciting to know that there may be a series in the works. So just give me 1 second, everyone. I'm trying to send Rose a phone number, and sadly I can't type and talk at the same time. I can, but I don't want my mouth to be agape while I do it.
I tell you what, while Joe is typing, let me just jump in for a second and remind everyone that we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So if you've got anything that you want to ask, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A box. So not necessarily the chat, but the Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen, almost to the right-hand side. And I'll be monitoring that, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. I just sent that to Rose, so hopefully that will get through her that way. I'm always interested too, and I know we'll sort of do a little bit of fill here. Brenda brought it out in Jordan is so chilly, and of course it was mentioned in the documentary, of course, the 2 fires that took place up on Screamer Mountain, and the fact that we've lost so many manuscripts, because this is before people were keeping them on computers and saving files digitally and things like that. But one of the things that I thought about, we were talking about how Lillian Smith went to China and she wrote about China, and I thought it very much Pearl S. Buck. And I was sad to find out, looking at the Lillian Smith reader that Rose edited, is that the manuscript for that particular book about China was actually lost in one of those fires. So there are excerpts where she wrote reminiscences in the Lillian Smith reader. So
I was going to say, in the journal, I can put a link to the journal to everybody. She writes about Pearl S. Buck. I don't remember if it's a review or if her or Paula write about it, or about her, sorry.
Oh, excellent. Well, I mean, as a West Virginian born and raised, I always love trying to make connections to Pearl S. Buck. I think, though, Lillian Smith was a little more progressive than Pearl S. Buck was. But also, just to remind you all, as you've seen in the films, of course, Patricia Bell Scott's wonderful book, The Firebrand and the First Lady, that won the Lillian Smith Book Award, about Polly Murray and Eleanor Roosevelt. And of course, the winners for this year, Brandon K. Winford, John Hervey Wheeler, Black Banking and the Economic Struggle for Civil Rights, and Jelani Favors, Shelter in the Time of Storm. How Black colleges foster generations of leadership and activism. And I am sure if you are ordering some Lillian Smith books from Charis Books, just ask them to put those in your queue as well, and they can mail those to you. Let's see, do we have Rose? Has she managed to call in? Allie, can we see any of that?
I haven't seen her yet.
Okay.
Can I share this with you real quick?
Yeah, I was saying, let's go ahead and do that, Matthew, while we're sort of waiting.
Well, I had one more thing to share with you. I just found Pearl S. Buck, and this is actually what she said about the journal. If you look at the bottom, it is encouraging and heart. And look who's right above it, Mary McLeod Bethune.
Yeah.
I appreciate deeply the service you are rendering was Bethune. Eugene Barnett, who was, of course, was her brother-in-law, a maturity and a balance which will carry conviction with thoughtful readers. And then Pearl Buck, it is encouraging and heartening to think that out of the South comes this keen, intelligent publication, which is fully aware of the situation as it is in the world today. If there are people in the South able to think like this, it gives hope to the whole country and the people everywhere. And Eleanor Roosevelt actually wrote too. So there's comments from so many people. Thomasina Johnson, who was actually at one of the interracial meetings in '43. Charles S. Johnson up here. So just to show you kind of the scope, I think at the height, and Rose can correct me if I'm wrong, they have like 10,000, I think, subscribers, something like that.
Oh, did I just see something pop up from Hal Jacobs? Did I just see Hal post something?
Yeah, he posted about the documentary.
Oh, okay, excellent.
And I'll show it real quick if you. So the documentary, you can stream it. Somebody was asking about, and Hal can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think you can stream it, and there's a link on here too for $5 to rent. LillianSmithDoc.com. And it won the Morehouse College Human Rights Film Festival, Best Full-Length Documentary Award. Would you like me to go ahead and share real quick too?
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Okay. So we did a short video actually to commemorate Lil's passing. I always forget, I think in September. And we're going to share it tomorrow on social media, on our Facebook page, Instagram. It's just Lillian Smith Center at Piedmont College on Facebook. And our Twitter is LES, I always forget, LES Center or LES_Center. I think it's LES_Center. But this is the video that we made just to kind of commemorate her.
There is no going alone on a journey, whether one explores strange lands or Main Street, or one's own backyard. Always invisible traveling companions are close by. The giants and pygmies of memory, of belief, pulling you this way and that, not letting you see the world life-size, but insisting that you measure it by their own height and weight. But you forget this. You start out feeling free. Your bags and your brain are packed full of supplies and facts for your trip, all the things you think you need, and then you get on your ship or plane, whatever, set for places you have not seen, friends you have never met, and suddenly something is there beside you whispering, better not look at that, better not listen. Come, I know a place, a person. What a talent these companions have for luring us into dead ends. And yet, I could not have done without them. For though there were a few memories, an old worn-out belief or two, that almost stopped me before my trip had begun, there were others that opened doors wide. And it was by their help that I found at last what I had gone in search of.
And she's reading the opening from The Journey there, which is probably my favorite passage.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Matthew. We do have, don't forget, you type in your questions in the Q&A, and we did have one for Hal. Allie, I don't know if we can promote him to a presenter or just unmute him to
Sure.
maybe answer the question.
I can promote him, Hal, if you're ready. Hold on.
Because we have a question about the epilogue, and I think Hal is probably the best person to answer the question about the epilogue.
So hopefully he's ready. I just promoted him to panelist. Hal, you do not have to turn on your video if you're not ready for that, but you can talk now.
There's Hal.
Ah.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Hal, but we do have a question about the epilogue, and I figured you would be the best person to answer this. And it comes from Amy, and she asks, I'd love it if Hal or anyone could speak to the film's epilogue, the decision, necessity, connecting Lil's story to where we find ourselves today. And of course, she thanks us all for hosting this virtual event.
Well, it's interesting because Sue Ellen was partly responsible for that epilogue. We were going to show the film in Portland, and we knew there was going to be a Q&A afterwards, and we wanted something to bring the film home to and speak to what's going on, you know, in the world today. And so we crafted that, I think, after the Decatur screening. And now we have two versions. We keep that version for a lot of the classrooms and a lot of the academic screenings, but we have another one without that epilogue that we were showing to Georgia Public Libraries because there was a fear that we were being polarizing or something. But I felt like it was important to give the voices, the final voices to George Yancey and Lonnie King at the end, to let them speak up. And I think Lillian would have approved of that message as well.
Excellent. Thank you so very, very much, Hal. I am once again trying to type and talk at the same time. So we're still trying to get Rose on here so she can talk to us a little bit about Lillian Smith's writing in The Reader. There we go. Okay.
Joe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Sue Ellen.
I just want to say hi, Hal, and I love the epilogue.
The epilogue has gone over very well, and it's really added to the energy after the film when we have the talkbacks. And I'm so appreciative that you were sort of behind that and encouraging us to do it.
Well, the way you did it was perfect, and I think it connects Lil and that time period to this moment, which is so important. Thanks. It's good to see you.
I'll pop in to say I love it too. This is my third time seeing it tonight, Hal, and I love the documentary and I love this ending. I hadn't seen that before. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
You have your producer there too, Hal.
We have our executive producer here as well. We've enjoyed hearing the comments from people. It's great talk back.
I love Gina's question, Joe. It's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to read next. So from Gina, she asks, as Sue Ellen and Carrie Lee mentioned tonight, and others described it in the documentary, Lillian Smith was an uncompromising force and clearly outspoken. However, in the documentary, the 1967 Today Show appearance shows the physical appearance of a smiling, genteel Southern woman. If you listen to her actual words in that appearance, she was, of course, clearly outspoken and challenged the racist practices of the time. I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that conflicting physical image with her strong language.
Anna, do you want to go first?
I don't want to jump in. I want y'all to go, but I've thought about this a lot.
So if I can, just for a minute, I completely understand what Lonnie Smith was saying on the film about the fact that he could preach as much about anti-racism and, everything that he's preaching. There's still a sector of white people who are not going to listen because it's him preaching it, right? At some point, there has to be white people doing the work of talking to other white people. And as I've gotten farther along in my own work, I've not only had many elderly Black activists tell me that same thing, but I have come to consider it my life's mission and the mission of many other white Southern writers and Southern activists is that we need to clean up the mess that we and our ancestors created. It is the onus is on us. We have left it too long for the oppressed to deal with their own oppression. And so I think that she was smart enough and sophisticated enough to know that if she maintained the exterior of a prim and proper and certainly, attractive by feminine standards, white woman, that was a package that would be palatable to a lot of white Southerners. And I think that made her message much more effective.
I love what you said. Sue Ellen, sorry if I was about to cut you off there. But Sue Ellen and I were talking about this a little bit a couple weeks ago. Sue Ellen was kind enough to talk to me for several hours in my research for this. And I said, in everything that Sue Ellen was describing, I said, I have Katharine Hepburn in mind for this. Does that sound right? And Sue Ellen was like, it does. And because it's so it's such a difficult thing it's such a fascinating thing to explore. And it's such an unfortunate situation that women are in, that you have to present yourself in a particular way, right? If you have certain things you want to say. And so how you frame something. And so it is really interesting what I'm doing with this pitch document right now, trying to what we call a Bible or a format. So you're putting together little bits of language and images to try and sell this and show potential producers and financiers and actresses and directors what this project will look like. And so I was putting Katharine Hepburn, then also putting Reese Witherspoon, putting Cameron Diaz next to Paula, putting images and matching faces to sort of help show what these faces can look like. And that's kind of what we have to do, right? It's kind of what Lillian had to do, is present herself in that way in order to be heard.
Yeah, I agree, Anna. And every time I see that piece, it makes me so sad, because that's not Lil. And it makes me angry that she had to smile that way and move that way. That wasn't the person I saw striding across the floor preaching at me. And so yes, women have had to do that, but it's not something that we should take lightly. And hopefully we won't have to do that much longer.
I think about that smile she has there. I think about the 62 piece though, where she's talking about artistry. She's doing the same thing that I think about throughout that whole thing. But I like the fact that Sue Ellen pointed out that she wasn't like that. And every time I've seen her kind of like that genteel Southern woman that Dr. Merritt was talking about. I see it as a performance, but I have to remember too, that strength. And I don't think Sue Ellen mentioned this. She was only 5'2". Mm-hmm. She was 5'2", brown hair, brown eyes, found that in the passport photos. And so she wasn't tall, but she was commanding, right?
Definitely.
We do have another question from Andrew, and Andrew asks, have there been any recent studies of her work in relation to intersectionality? The concept is often used to describe the intersectional experiences of those who are oppressed and discriminated against, but Lillian Smith seemed to address the potent intersectionality of her oppressors.
I don't think there has been specifically in regards to Crenshaw's intersectionality. I do know if we're looking at class, there is discussions of class, and that's one of the reasons that I love Dr. Merritt's work, because it very much aligns with Smith, and she can talk more about her work more with poor whites, specifically in the antebellum South, but continuing through. That's where I see the intersectionality in Lil's work. I don't see her, well, maybe not, because she does in Killers of the Dream actually talk about the past that white men tread at the back to the quarters for Black women. So there is intersectionality that could be talked about there, but I haven't seen it framed in regards to intersectionality, at least in scholarship, personally.
And actually, Matthew, while we have you on, there's a question from Gail. She just basically expressing her misunderstanding. That she never heard of her, and she grew up in Atlanta and worked for Rebecca Ranson at SAME and participated in Roots. I do not remember Rebecca ever mentioning Lillian Smith. When was the center established at Piedmont College?
This is where we need Craig, but Sue Ellen can answer this too. So I think the center, Nancy Smith Victor, who was Lil's niece and went to the camp, her and her husband, Robert, and Nancy taught at Florida State. I don't remember if Robert taught at Florida State. Sue Ellen could correct me or anything with that. But they had it before Piedmont. And I don't remember how they got it. But they started off as an artist residency, and Piedmont got it in 2014 or 2015. And put the institution behind it. You know, the thing with me is I grew up in the South. My focus in literature is African-American literature, Southern literature. I'd never heard of her. I found her book at a book sale when I was getting my PhD. I found her book at a book sale. I found Strange Fruit, looked at the cover. I was like, oh, this is a Black author. I put it on my shelf. So I was like, all the books I'd read about interracial intimacy had been Black authors: Ernest Gaines, Octavia Butler, Alice Childress, on and on and on, whatever you want to say. So I just put it up there and didn't realize she was a white author till later, of course. And I didn't dig much into her, of course, till I got here either. So even digging into her here and learning about her, I'm like, why did I not know about her? And I think Dr. Merritt really kind of hit the nail on the head if you look at it. And it's hit, and some of the speakers in Hal's documentary actually talk about it too. She was suppressed. And that was one of the things she lamented throughout her life too. She saw herself as an artist as she taught, but she was suppressed. If you look at it, what was the quote that you gave, Dr. Merritt, from Ralph McGill? Because I know they kind of had a falling out too, I think. Do you remember the quote you gave?
Yes, it was, let me pull it up. It is, in many respects, Miss Lillian Smith is a modern feminine counterpart of the ancient Hebrew prophets Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah, who came, hot-eyed and accusing, out of the deserts to stand in the marketplaces of their cities, crying, woe unto ye who are unrepentant and of little faith, thereby causing many citizens to be sore annoyed and afraid.
And remember what Lonnie King said, she's Jane the Baptist.
It's such a great line.
Yeah, and I keep using Jane the Baptist whenever I'm pitching her to somebody, that and her connection with King. But if you think about it, I mean, she's a white woman doing this, and McGill and both King are framing her as a prophet, and the prophets were not looked upon, of course, favorably. So, and as a white Southern male, I also agree with what Dr. Merritt said. It's important for us to know as whites this history, that we're not alone and we're not the first ones doing this, basically. I think it's so important.
We do have one more question. I am going to see, though, if we can get Rose on the line one last time here. Rose, were you able to call in? Allie, are we showing anything that?
I don't think so, Joe. Sorry, I just texted you. I don't think that she's been able to make it work.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and let's get to this last question as we are wrapping up for the evening. And it's actually for Hal from Pearl. Dr. McHaney is here this evening. And Pearl asks, how did you come to Lillian Smith as your subject?
Well, I was looking for a subject in the spring of 2017, and I had done something about a weaver who lived near Lillian Smith, so her name was coming up. But I was also, and I don't usually say this, I was also thinking about doing a documentary about Governor Lester Maddox. I had interviewed him a couple of years before he died. I had written about him, and people who know Georgia history know what a segregation he was. So it's interesting that I had to choose between, in my mind, Lester Maddox, who I had a connection with, and Lillian Smith, who I had no connection with, basically. And I realized, I mean, everything was starting to point towards Lillian Smith, even though there were compelling reasons to do a thing about a segregationist politician who never had any political experience and suddenly finds himself in the governor's chair, just like a certain president. I thought there would be a resonance there, but thank God I went with Lillian Smith. And I talked with Craig Amundsen, who was the director, and he was very encouraging, as was everybody with the Lillian Smith Center. And so I think I made the right choice there.
You still made the right choice. We are so grateful for you and always will be. This is just, the documentary is absolutely wonderful.
Well, let me just add, since Rose isn't here to speak for herself, it was also reading her letters that she had edited of Lillian and reading the reader, and then having a 4-hour conversation with Rose, just solidified everything about Lillian. We felt like we knew her. We had, we knew the private side of her as well as the professional side. And I don't know if we could have done it without Rose's help. And Rose had spent her career, her academic career researching Lillian Smith. She had done all the spade work, and we just sort of came in and she helped us out. Lonnie King and the other people, everybody was there. Brenda Bynum was there and ready to help and talk about her, and just everybody was filled with such passion. It was just so much fun to go on that journey with everybody.
Well, I just want to mention too, Allie has put up in the chat for us all, if you would like to purchase copies of the Lillian Smith reader from Charis Books, that link is there. Also other selections about Lillian Smith and race, Am I to Be Heard? The Letters of Lillian Smith is on that list. Killers of the Dream, Frank Yerby Critical Essays. I think that's Carrie Lee Merritt's book also. There's also one, Labor History, Race, Class, and Power. So definitely a fine selection of books there. And thank you again to Charis Books and More for being our bookseller this evening. As I said earlier, they've been doing a wonderful job, like so many of their independent bookstores, with getting books in the mail and doing pop-up stores where you can actually go and browse books and select them that way as well. So thank you to Charis. Also, don't forget to order from Farm to Cocktail, the lovely shrub mixes. It is very, very nice. There was a book several years ago called Tequila Mockingbird that was all literary inspired. I know, Tequila Mockingbird, I know. It wasn't my joke. I can't be blamed for that one. But it was all literary inspired cocktails. But you also are supporting a local business in Clayton, Georgia at the same time. I would also like, of course, to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation. They're the folks that pay for our Zoom account so we can continue to do these programs online during this pandemic and keep bringing authors and movies to you all in your home. And we thank you for that. So in the season of giving, if you would like to give to the Lillian Smith Center or to the Cab Library Foundation, we thank you in advance for those wonderful donations. I know we've just gotten past Thanksgiving and we've begun the season of Advent. So Merry Christmas to you all. Happy Hanukkah for those of you who are celebrating Hanukkah, or whatever holiday you choose to celebrate. We hope that they are going to be joyful and safe. And if we all keep each other safe, I'm sure we will be back in person doing these very, very soon. So thank you all for allowing us into your homes and sharing this event with you tonight. Thank you, Matthew and Hal and Carrie and Anna and Rose for trying so hard to get online with us, for sharing your knowledge and for sharing this wonderful, wonderful work. Have a safe and happy holiday, and we will see you again very, very soon.